Hello dear chess friends, I'm International Master Andrey Ostrovskiy and you're welcome to the series of lessons dedicated to the essentials of Queen Endgames. In this lesson we're going to discuss Queen and Pawn versus Queen cases. So the first very important moment to understand is that this type of endgames is very complicated. Why? Mainly because queens are the strongest pieces and they simply control enormous quantity of squares. So there are usually a lot of different opportunities to do a harm, right? So a lot of checks, a lot of calculations, and so on. So there is no strict theory. Actually, it is much better just to understand typical ideas, typical methods, than learning, for example, some positions by heart. Moreover, this approach, learning by heart would be very hard, if possible, for Queen endgames. So, first of all, let's have a look at this position and try to understand main features. So white has the pawn on the 6th rank. It is the bishop's pawn, the pawn on the c-file. The same pattern can appear when the strongest side has a pawn on the f-file. So it is a very promising situation for the strongest side because the pawn is only 2 squares before promotion, and this pawn can be used as a shield for white's king in case of black's queen's checks. So what are the plans of both sides? So since black has no chance to blockade the passed pawn with the king, which is usually the best option by the way, black will probably do everything to come up with a perpetual. So the one should remember that perpetual check is the main method of the defense in Queen endgames in general. So white will try to do what? To promote the own pawn, of course, and to avoid this perpetual check. We can see that white's king simply prevents the movement of the own pawn, so it's necessary to go away. But here's the first question, where to go? The logic says the king should be somewhere away from opponent's queen, right? To run away, to try to run away at least from his checks and so on. But in fact, it is not that easy. Usually you have to do the opposite, so not to run away, but to run towards. And the best move here is king to b6, so actually the king comes closer to opponent's queen. To understand this maneuver, we need to follow the next moves, and everything will be more or less clear very soon. So king goes to b6. At least one thing is pretty much understood. White wants just to promote the own pawn. But what is going on if queen starts checking? So first of all, you can see that white's queen helps in preventing some of these checks. So this queen covers diagonal g1, a7. This queen controls some squares like, let's say, b4 and a3. So this also reduces black's queen's chances to do anything. So queen b3 is the only check here. Now king makes one step closer again. King goes to a5. So as you can see, c3 check is not possible, a3 check is not possible, so only check for black is queen to a2. And now king goes to b5. And it appears that black has no more checks. Why? Because the position of the own king seriously helps the opponent to avoid these perpetuals and so on. So the only possibility for black to check opponent's king is to use the b file. But it's not possible because if queen goes to the b file, it doesn't really matter which square the queen occupies, queen goes to b4 with counter check, right? So the queen covers the king and now the exchange of queens is inevitable. And that is one of the main recipes of avoiding a perpetual check. So to find the suitable square for a king where it can be covered with the help of counter check, right? So it is a great protection. Queen takes b4, king takes b4, and it's clear that pawn c6 simply promotes. So black has no checks anymore when the king is on b5. And that is the explanation why the king went towards the queen. So white found this great square b5, understood that it's possible to occupy it after a few checks, and the opponent simply has no more checks. So as you can see, making the progress in Queen endgames is actually based on a good calculation along with knowing basic ideas. So queen goes to a8. It is the only chance for black to try to stop the pawn. So now pawn goes to c7. Of course, when there is the time, it is necessary to make a progress, so to push pawn further towards the promotion square. Now, black has two options. They are to blockade the pawn with the queen, or to make a check on b7. In case of queen b7, the king simply goes to a5. The next check is queen a8, king goes to b6. So no more checks, and queen has to blockade the pawn, otherwise white promotes. And now white wins easily, so queen simply goes to c6, preventing the check from e6 square. So if queen moves away from c8 square, it won't be check, so white will have the time to promote the pawn. That's the idea. And white's plan to make a progress here is also quite simple. So first, king will go to a7, again to prevent the check from the e6 square. And only after that, the queen will go to b7, again offering the exchange of queens. And if queens are being exchanged, then c7 promotes without problems. If not, then queen is forced to go away, and queen will control the promotion square, so the pawn will be also promoted. So here it is a winning position. So everything says that it's much better for black just to play queen c8 immediately. And queen goes to c8. So after queen c8, white tries to do the same, right? To build the same position. So king goes to b6. And now white is about just to play queen c6 with the plan we already discussed. So black has to be quick, since the move of the king, let's say, doesn't help. Queen c6 in this case, and just the same. So the fact that the king came closer doesn't really make any difference, because still it is not possible to stop the pawn, right? So queen simply goes to b7 and white wins. So it's necessary to play queen e6 check here. King goes to b7. Although this move looks very logical, because king just helps to support, because king just helps to promote the pawn. Everything is still based on proper calculation. So in some cases it might be not the best move. So here it is one of the best moves for sure. So queen has several options now to stop pawn c7 somehow. The first option is to make queen b3 check. In this case, white proceeds with the king c6, and it is the main line. Another possibility is to make the check from e4, in which case king goes to a7. And now if queen a4 check, let's say king goes to b6. And we can see that we actually came back to the initial position and initial maneuver, but with a great difference. So the pawn is already on c7. So queen b3, king a5, queen a2, king b5. Checks are over, and well, the next move will be c8, right? White easily wins here. If queen goes to f7, and it is the third option for the queen to stop the pawn, just to pin it, white has a great idea. So queen goes to b4 with check, and queen plays a great role here, because after king d3 and king b8, we can notice that this queen simply covers the b file, preventing all possible checks along this file. This queen controls f4 square, which was possible for black's queen to occupy to pin c7 pawn, so queen can't stop the pawn this way. And white easily wins by promoting the pawn to a queen next move. So let's come back to the main line. It is queen to b3 move. So now king goes to c6. Again, probably the best square, because it leads to a quick queen. There are a lot of different possibilities for black now. Let's start, let's say, with queen g8 move. This move helps to control c8 square, but the problem is that white has a chance to play queen d5 check. So after exchanging queens, white's pawn promotes. The same is after queen e6 check, let's say. So white uses the d file to exchange queens. So again, as we can see, white just found the perfect square for king to hide. The same as after queen f3, so queen goes to d5. And finally, if queen goes to h3, controlling c8 square, and at first glance just protecting himself from counter checks, white wins the following way. So first queen d5, king goes to e2, and now king to b7, preparing c8. And now we can understand the idea behind having the queen on d5, because queen controls diagonal a8 h1, preventing checks along this diagonal. Queen controls b3 square, the only possible square for black's queen to attack our king along the b file. So once again, black's queen has only a possibility to pin the pawn to stop it. So queen goes to h7. Now king goes to b8, so the back rank is controlled indirectly. I mean, if queen checks along the back rank, then c8 queen wins. If queen goes to b1 check, then queen goes to b7 again, covering the b file, and now there is no chance even to pin the pawn c7, so white wins. And finally, after king c6, if black makes this check on a4, we simply come back to the main winning maneuver. So king goes to b6, queen b3, king goes to a5, queen a2, king goes to b5, and checks are over. I mean, sensible checks, because every check along the b file leads to queen b4 counter check. The next move will be just a promotion of the pawn. So let's have a look on the other example. In this position, white has the central pawn, which is also quite good for the strongest side. So with the central pawn, the strongest side has great chances to win. And this pawn is already on the 7th rank. So another rule says that, well, the closer the pawn to the promotion square, the more chances, of course, to win the game. But still, it doesn't mean that it is an easy stuff, because as we discussed, queen control enormous quantity of different squares, so there are a lot of possibilities to check the king, right? So black starts with a queen c5 check. Queen c7, by the way, makes no sense in this concrete position because of king e8, after which there are no more checks, no possibilities to pin the pawn. So instead, queen c5 check should be played. Now king goes to e8, and there are a lot of different possibilities. So the first and the simplest one is queen to e3, after which queen goes to e7, and queen, as we can see, has no squares to check the king to pin the pawn, so white promotes next move. A tricky one is queen to h5 check here. So the king goes to f8. Again, it makes no sense to put the king on the square of promotion, because we want to have this square empty, right, just to promote our pawn. King f8, queen goes to c5 check. Now king goes to g7. So we can see what white does. White wants to put the king on the same file with opponent's king, or on the adjacent file, because exactly in this case, white will have a great probability of answering the check with a counter check. Let's have a look. For example, after queen g1, it's easy even to hide completely. King goes to h8 and no more checks. So queen goes to c7 here, pinning the pawn. Queen goes to f5 check, and now it's not an easy stuff for black to find a good square for a king. By the way, pay attention to this method. So prior to making any progress with the king, white tries just to find the best square for own queen, right? Because only the cooperation of the king, queen, and the pawn can help to win this position, of course. So if king goes to h2, let's say, in this case, king goes to f8, getting closer. Queen d8 check, king goes to f7. Queen c7, king goes to e8. And now only queen c6 is possible to stop the pawn. Now king goes to e7. And after queen c7, white has a chance to play queen d5 move. Very annoying one, because now there is the threat of queen d6 exchanging queens. And after queen goes to a7, king goes to e6. And it's no longer possible to check the king, because in both cases queen goes either to d6 or e5, and both squares are squares from where the queen just gives a counter check, right? And here is another important thing to remember. So the placement of the queen matters, and the best possible one is in the center, which is quite obvious, but you shouldn't forget about it. So if king goes to g3 here, then king goes to h6, a pretty straightforward move. And again, so the queen can't check along the 6th rank, because in this case it will be queen g6 counter check. The queen can't check from c1 square, because it will be queen g5 counter check. And white also has a threat of checking from g5 with the queen and then promoting the pawn. So king to h4 looks like the most testing continuation, in which case king g6 is okay for white, because 6th rank is not accessible for opponent's queen. In the view of this queen f6 that we already discussed, a counter check. And king g6 creates a threat of queen g5 check and promotion of the pawn next move. So if queen g3, then king goes to f7. Let's say if queen goes to c7 now, then queen f6 check is possible, followed by king e8. No more checks, no more possibilities of pinning the pawn, and pawn promotes. And if queen b3 check here, then queen e6, queen b7, and finally queen e7 check, and pawn is no longer pinned, so d8 will be the next move with the promotion. So finally, after king e8, black has a chance to play queen b5, just pinning the pawn. In which case, again, prior to making any progress with the king, white tries to improve the position of the own queen. So queen goes to e6, getting closer to central squares and protecting d7 pawn. King goes to h2. King goes to f7. Now d8 is a threat. Queen goes to h5. Check, probably the best possibility for black, but there are of course a lot of other possibilities. King goes to g7. Once again, the same method. As we can see, instead of being closer to the pawn, the king tries to occupy the same file with opponent's king or the adjacent one. Queen g5, king h7, and we can see that it is no longer possible to check the king along the h file. So this means the queen has to move somewhere to blockade the pawn, probably. There is a threat of queen h6, by the way. It's not possible to put the king on the g file for black because of queen g6 move. So queen d8 is only a possible move, and king goes to g6 now. A great way to move, simply controlling most important squares, preventing queen's activation, and getting closer to the pawn again. So white made a great stuff. White's made opponent's queen passive, and now just improves the position of the own king, and everything is once again based on a proper calculation. For example, if queen goes to h8 now, then queen d6 check and promotion of the pawn. You can notice that it is also a very important method to remember. So just a check with the threat of the promotion of the pawn. In many cases, it makes simply impossible some active moves from the side which wants to make a draw. So if, let's say, king just stays and waits, then king of white gets closer. And now what? If queen c7, then king e8, no more checks, no more possibilities to pin the pawn. If queen goes to h8, then again white uses this central square d5 to check the king and to ensure the promotion. And finally, if after king f7, king goes to h2, then queen goes to e7. So it is exactly the method that we discussed in the previous example. So first white occupied the 7th rank, right, to avoid checks from the 6th rank, and then queen simply went to e7 to force the queen's exchange or this queen's movement somewhere, making possible for white to promote the pawn. So thanks a lot for your attention. See you in next lessons.